Welcome to another episode of Neurodiversity with Theo Smith, the podcast where we explore the incredible strengths, unique challenges, and untapped potential of neurodiverse individuals in the workplace. I'm your host, Theo Smith, and today we have an inspiring conversation ahead of us. Joining me is David Plink, CEO of Top Employees Institute, a global leader in HR strategies and employer certification. David not only leads an organization committed to improving workplaces worldwide, he has personal experiences and professional expertise to offer us today on the intersection of inclusion, leadership, and neurodiversity. We're going to dive into some of those experiences with David and discuss the incredible work happening at the Top Employers Institute, where they're fostering a more inclusive world of work through data, insights, and really a supportive culture to their customers. So, David, welcome to us. Lovely to have you on the show today.
Great to be here. And with that kind of introduction, what can go wrong?
Everything can. We live in a world where it all can, and that keeps it exciting, right? So really pleased to have you on today. Just to let the audience know, I had the pleasure of meeting you at an annual Top Employer event only recently, a couple of months ago. And I was invited to talk about neurodiversity there. And also we had one of our incredible customers who became a top employer a year or so ago. And they were also talking about the work that we had done with them around neuroinclusion. And you did a fantastic introduction that really got the topic going and gave us lots of insights around what's happening within the world, what's happening within the customers, and also sharing your expertise from a personal perspective. So it was brilliant to be able to be involved in that event and now to be able to get you onto the podcast. So beyond kind of the obvious CEO of, David, intro yourself. Let us know a little bit about who you are, what you're about, and what you do.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very nice opportunity to meet each other indeed, and to see your energy that comes to life as well in this podcast portrayed on stage, because you were quite bouncing around that day. So I really appreciate that in front of our clients. My name is David Plink. I am the CEO of the Top Employers Institute, and beyond that, I'm also a human being, 52 next week, or 2 weeks, I guess. I live in the Netherlands. I have 4 kids. Very happy dog. You may hear barking throughout this podcast, but hopefully she behaves. And I'm an outdoors person. I love to be outdoors. That's the thing that gives me energy. If I'm all day in an office or all day indoors in my home office, I'll go crazy. So I need to be outdoors. So that's an important thing to me. So that's
Brilliant.
a little bit about me.
Lovely. Thank you. And a great introduction. And so what does it take to be the CEO of Top Employee Institute? And what does that look like? Because for a lot of people listening, they may not understand, I guess, the level of work that goes on behind the closed doors with an organization like yours, because it's much more than just an organization that certifies companies as a top employer, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the certification is what we're well known for, and that is obviously the most visible component of what we do. But I guess if you look at the 2,500 clients that we serve around the world, the data and insights that we provide them on all kinds of HR practices that improve the world of work for their people, that's really why they are joining the program. So that is driving it. Again, the certification, the certification seal is something that is visible. Companies put that on their doormats, on their doors, on their websites. That's very much out there. But what goes underneath that whole certification, what happens underneath the hood, is really the assessment of all their policies and the insights they derive from that. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the company does. What it takes to be the CEO of the company is, I would say, mostly perseverance and stamina. I've done it now for a good 13 years in this capacity. And navigating kind of the environment in which we live with all these kind of rapidly succeeding crises around the world, it means you have to just stay calm when necessary and know that it's lots of things happen in the world. Obviously, they impact business, they impact our people within, and the second part is more important than the business itself. So I think it's important to realize that to take ourselves serious enough, but also sometimes not that serious. Just live a little and breathe in, breathe out, and then it'll all be fine.
Brilliant. And so when we talk about neurodiversity and neuroinclusion, what does that mean to you? I'm often asking guests, why does the topic matter to them? Why do they care? What is the thing that drives you to take an interest in this topic?
Yeah, I think from a personal perspective, I grew up, and beyond that, I have children. I have 4 children, as mentioned. There's a lot happening around me in terms of neurodiversity. So besides having various neurodivergent brains in my direct family or amongst my children, I also recognize that wider in my family, in my closer group of friends. So it's something that is out there. So they say that 20% of people have a neurodivergent brain. I think that statistic is getting updated pretty much every year because we're discovering more. People are more open to discover also how their brain works for themselves. So I think you mentioned this really well during the conference that we had as well. Um, Everyone is neurodiverse. All our brains work differently, so we don't have to categorize. It helps sometimes to categorize, but I just experience it from a very close range. Having people around me that have, on the one hand, neurodivergent brains, and on the other hand, amazing talents that come with that as well. So I think that's the discovery over the past few years that neurodiversity is not just a disability. It's not a disability at all. It's actually a special way of looking at the world. And most interesting innovation comes from neurodivergent brains. Like if you look at Richard Branson and Elon Musk and other leaders in industries, they're often not neurotypical, far from it.
Yeah, and Greta Thunberg, people who challenge the status quo, rather from the top of organizations, also from the ground up through community, right? So all different facets and aspects of areas of the world where people are bringing their neurological differences to the table, which I love. There's something else that happened at the event. So I really appreciate you sharing why it matters and why you see that it's becoming prominent in the world and some of the data and insights there. I think from a disability perspective, we possibly are talking around the social model versus the disability model, whereby it's society, it's the barriers are put in place to us by others, right? So if we can raise some of those barriers, we can be much more successful and productive and achieve many more things. But we need to understand those barriers are there first, and so many of us
Absolutely.
don't. And one thing I noticed at being at the event is there were lots of your employees from your organization who came over to me during, afterwards, and even via social media following that to share their stories and their family stories and their challenges, their successes. And I found that was fascinating in itself because you began the session in a really powerful way. And then that follows through in terms of your employees feeling that they could then come over and share their stories and just showed the level of neurological variation within your organization as well, which was really good. So if we think about that now in terms of the work that you do, what I saw in that event, which really inspired me, is many of the organizations talking about their work were talking a lot around diversity and inclusion. Chiesi were there talking about some of their incredible work, especially in the UK. And so I found that quite energizing, right? That these organizations, okay, the certification is around being a top employer, but actually many of those organizations are really resonating with the inclusion piece, right? And the neuro inclusion piece. So what are you seeing from that perspective? What are top employers doing? Because you'll have a wider scope of view than I do. And what are they telling you about this topic currently?
Yeah, good question. And I'm going to go to the first part initially, where you mentioned my colleagues coming up to you and actually sharing their stories. I think that's something that we see within our company, but also beyond. That the moment you start having the conversation, the moment that you open up on personal experiences, on things that work differently for individuals, it starts this flood wave of conversation. And that's something we've seen internally in our company, which is um, massively helping in accepting um, people with different working brains. So I think that's really something that that was overwhelming over the past few years. Within our senior leadership team, our executive leadership team, people came to me and said, "Hey, this is how it works for me," which really helped understand each other better and work together in a more understanding way, I would say. And that is a big step. So when we started to pilot a product, a program for neurodiversity for employers, it did a lot of things inside of our company as well, which I'm hugely excited about. That we have that culture where you can speak up and share how things work for you on this specific trait of diversity. But there are obviously a lot of others as well where we tend to have a culture that people can speak up in. So I think that's the one side of the coin. If you look at if you go broader than that, and if you look at what our clients are saying, we ran a pilot last year. So initially, our idea was to develop a certification program for neurodiversity. So companies who had best practices in place to be more neuroinclusive, they could then be certified for that. And one thing that we saw is that the certification was too early. So certification is really based on existing best practices, whereas neurodiversity is really a next practice. We see companies starting to develop, having those ambitions and really building it up, but not claiming they have all the wisdom in-house. So I think that's a difference from our main program, the Top Employer Certification. And this is one where you see that there's a lot more development, there's a lot more interest and exchange required rather than a full-on certification. So that was a very interesting learning in our pilot, and that translated as well into how our 20 clients in that program experienced it. So we looked at a maturity level. So we got 5 maturity levels ranging from just starting to having really good practice in place for many categories of neurodiversity. And we saw that most companies were at the beginning of their maturity development. And that is okay because it is an emerging terrain. It's something that over the last 2-3 years has really become more prominent on the HR agenda. But we see that it's really developing still. And one of the things that we also need to take into account is you can't be expected to do it all. Like to have a fantastic program for people with autism, and a fantastic program for people with dyslexia, and a fantastic program for people with ADHD, and so forth. Some companies focus as well. So we have this software company as part of our program who has a testing facility where in Brazil, where pretty much everyone on that team is autistic. They have laser focus. They're super committed. They're really eager to deliver their best work, and that is what they focus on. And that means at this moment they don't have anything for ADHD or for other neurodiversities in place, and that's okay. You don't have to excel in everything. It's also a matter of building it up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really challenging, isn't it? Because if they see it as too big a piece of work, they don't start. And when we start to break it down into its constituent components, we can start to think around how we can overcome some of these. And for a lot of organizations, that may need to be thinking about doing it in a particular country. Work that we've done with organizations like Barclay was they felt that the UK would be the most progressive in terms of being able to take on some of the learnings and therefore be able to input them and deliver on them. And some other countries are a bit slow behind, and therefore there's some more learning and development that needs to be done to get them to that point where they can start to implement some of these best practices. So I really understand that. And I mean, neurodiversity is, when we think about autism, this co-occurrence means that if you're autistic, you're more likely to be another trait under neurodiversity and neurodivergence. So we also know that it's more complex than a single trait. It's actually about human experiences, isn't it? And if we can
No,
start to think
totally,
about
absolutely
that
recognize that.
and the team, so the example you gave there, that's about that team, isn't it? Why are they performing really well? What are the mechanisms that have helped them do that? What can we learn from that? What can we share with others about that? And then that really starts to help shift the dial. And then if we're to change some of those dynamics and introduce people who perhaps are very different, how are we going to accommodate them and ensure that we still maintain the support for those individuals? Because I think that's where some programs have failed in the past. They have not been able to take that team and transition it into other parts of the business and other ways of working. And therefore, when that team member wants to get promoted, where do they go? And are the teams ready? But this is why we're at early stages of development in terms of how we work with this. So what else are you seeing then from organizations? I guess if we think about D&I more broadly, we've seen the appetite go up. We've seen budget cuts happen significantly. We've seen key roles taken out of diversity and inclusion, because let's not forget, neuroinclusion is a part of that whole piece, neurodiversity. And we've also seen that the interest, however, in terms of what senior leaders are saying, is that D&I is still top of the agenda. But we've also seen recruitment teams have been decimated. And with the potential advent of AI, that's the replacement. But we know that it's not as simple as that. So what have you found from organizations at the moment around this whole piece? Do you got anything that you can share with us that might give us some insights or guidance on what's going on there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you mentioned as well in the beginning is that you see a lot of traction in the UK, and I think it's definitely a country in which, also from a legal perspective, there's more attention for various components of D&I. So there's obviously faster adoption, and that's something we definitely see across the world. So differences in countries, Brazil, Australia, UK being more advanced, and other markets lagging behind. And also, what is interesting, based on the economic circumstances we're experiencing right now, so we have, in many Western markets, at least, we have slow to declining GDP development. And that's something that has an immediate impact on recruitment, on staffing, and on initiatives within that scope. So there's certainly a visibility of little bit less attention from that angle. I think that's cyclical, but it's still there. And another thing that is also apparent, particularly in the US, there's a bit of a backlash. So the anti-wokeism movement is very visible. So you see companies, really withdrawing publicly from D&I initiatives and really playing it down because they're going to get backlash from their customers and the general opinion. So that's, in one word, it's just sad that it's happening. I have an opinion about that, as you can tell, but it's an environment in which we all operate. So I think with many of these things in the long term, we're making steps, we're advancing. It doesn't mean that everything is a linear process. And as said, if you look at the global economy, with geopolitical tensions, with macroeconomic development that is impacted by that, it's visible that companies are struggling and that they're a little bit more cautious with their spending. So what gets slashed first are the things that are not immediately related to the bottom line or not immediately related to other business results. So I think we have to be mindful of that. But we also see a lot of companies that are implementing advanced methodologies to attract and retain and engage their neurodivergent talent. So if you look at things that we're seeing around the world, we see companies that, particularly in the working from home space, give so much more opportunity. And you mentioned autism. I have people in my direct environment that are somewhere on the spectrum, and discussing with them what working in an open office would be like. It's described as hell. It's as simple as that. Like with all these impulses coming from everywhere, and some people thrive in an environment where they can talk and where they hear noises and where they hear other people chat. That's not necessarily the case for many people who are on the autism spectrum. So we see companies really taking that into account and giving people the liberty to work from where they are most successful. Same for onboarding. Hey, let's expose you to an onboarding where you are together with a class of 30 that started this month, and we're going to do that live. That's not necessarily the best way of onboarding neurodivergent talent. It may work very well for some and very poorly for others. So I think the awareness of looking at the world from a neurodivergent perspective, I think that's really emerging in these top employers.
Brilliant. The question I want to ask, but just before I do that, because you mentioned something that's interesting, the environment and working in the environment, and somebody mentioning to you that it would be horrible to go into an office space for them. I've just shared a post on LinkedIn today. Torin Ellis shared it with me, and it's the Gifted event, and it's a organization, a website that is basically supporting barbers, haircuts that are neurodivergent friendly, that are autistic friendly, ADHD friendly. And I think that is just for anybody who doesn't understand, maybe they can't quite get it. If you think for a child who's autistic or ADHD, going to have the haircut is a sensory nightmare, right? You've got scissors, which could kill you, right? You've got very noisy razors that can cut you and hurt you, and they're very loud. So from a sensory perspective, you've got lots of people talking in a small space. You may have like water being sprayed. Lots of it is outside of your control, because the barber doesn't understand that all of these things may affect you, and they often don't ask the question. In a child, that is amplified like 1,000 times, right? So translate that to the office environment, and what you're getting is like an adult perspective and version of that. You don't know who's going to come up to you and when. Your back may be facing lots of senior leaders, and therefore at any point one of them could just lean over you, see what you're doing and go, why are you not delivering that? What's going on here? You know, it's just, there's a lot of hypertensions that exist. And we could list them, right? And for some, it's the light, the noise, there's lots. And we all experience it a little bit of anxiety. But for some, it is like an explosion of anxiety. And I think people don't understand that these things happen as a child. They change and they develop because our experiences and our environments change and develop. We are no longer the child in the chair. We become the adult in the chair, and that does change things. I still put off going to a barber. Like, I still would like let my hair just keep growing because I think, oh, I just don't want to go. I don't want to get in the shower. When I'm in there, I'm okay. It's like the sensory element of that process. So just for anyone thinking about the comment, all of those layers go behind that comment, which I think can be really challenging. Another thing I want to pick up on is you mentioned Brazil a couple of times. I know you have top employees in South Africa. We think about Australia. I know you have particular growth areas globally. What's fascinating is I often share the Google trends map that I've been tracking for 5+ years now on the term neurodiversity. And for most of those years, the heat spot is on South Africa, it's on Brazil, it's on Australia, it's on the UK, it's on the US, and it's on Canada. That is about it. Ooh, that is about it. My technology likes that. So that really resonates in terms of what you've been sharing and what seems to be happening globally in terms of some of the growth. And any other thoughts you've got around why South Africa? Is it because of the growth economically and there's more jobs and more people now need jobs? There's shortage in talent, therefore more people are able to advocate or support. What is your? I know you won't have all the answers, but what's your perspective on that?
That's a good question. I don't think I have all the answers, but if I look at these countries and what unites them is a very multicultural basis. So if you look at the US, if you look at Canada, if you look at South Africa, UK, all these countries are countries. UK is a little bit different in the sense that it drew immigrants, but the others are countries where lots of immigrants went and built the country. So I think in terms of the whole scope of diversity and inclusion, um, it's ahead of the game. And obviously, that was mostly done over the past decades on demographics, ethnicity, sexual orientation, men versus women. There's a lot of things that are done over the past years in terms of diversity on those demographics, but that's shifting. And I think in countries where the focus was more already on diversity in demographic perspective, it's easier to make the switch. I definitely think they're more ahead of the game. I grew up and I live in the Netherlands, where we have, a more Western European perspective, tolerant, luckily, but also a more Western European perspective that can't be compared with South Africa or Brazil or Australia or US for that matter. So it's a different composition of the population, and as a consequence, it happens in a different pace, I would say. That's my personal thought. I can't back it up by academic research, I have to say.
No. That's great, and that's all I wanted. I just wanted a general perspective because we're seeing that there is this growth in interest, especially amongst your employers, and that they're engaged. And it fascinates me because you can't, and there not necessarily is a single answer. That's what's interesting about this because the topic is so new and developing so quickly. I also, and the Netherlands, which is interesting because I was at an event on Monday where I did a talk, and somebody said that they spoke to a CEO in the Netherlands and they were like, "Oh, this isn't even a thing in the Netherlands." However, ASML, one of the leading technology companies globally, their co-chairman, who's also their CTO, I think it's Martin van der Brink. I'm probably making a mess of his name,
No,
but
that's okay.
I spoke to them at an event, and he said, "I'm so dyslexic, I can't even spell. I can't even write properly," right? Which really resonates with me, and I think that is what we're missing some of this because he's not out telling everybody this. He's out saying it because ASML are very neurodiverse in that content. They're one of the leaders within the semiconductor industry, and probably partly why Nvidia are doing so well because of the innovation that sits behind the technology they're developing. And the reason why they're so innovative is because of their neurodivergence. They know that they have lots of employees who really do push the boundaries of what typical thinking is, right? They
Yeah.
and so that is coming from the Netherlands. But also I've spoken now in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, probably because it's such a great place to run events. I've spoken maybe 5 times on the topic of neurodiversity as a keynote in Amsterdam. So it's amazing, right? So we can make assumptions around how far countries are in their development. We can look at the heat spots, but actually there are still microcosms. There's still groups of communities. There's still people on the ground. There's still organizations doing incredible things. We just may not know about it yet. And I think that's what I'm excited to do more. And I'm excited to see what you do, David, with your organization, because you have the ability to share insights and information and really help organizations get to that next step, whatever that next step is for them.
Yeah.
And sorry, go on.
No, that's also a huge part of the product evolution that we saw over the past year. So from our start with a pilot that could lead to a certification, we actually pivoted, and now we created what we call an impact hub. So that's this in this case focused on neurodiversity. It could also be developed for other domains, but it's a place where you can actually assess yourself, find out what the maturity is, but mostly an opportunity to look at best practices from other companies, talk to them, build that community of like-minded people that are interested in advancing the workplace on neurodiversity. And that's something that's the way to discover things that you otherwise wouldn't see. So bringing folks together that share that passion and see the necessity. I think that's really something we love doing. And I think also what you mentioned, one of the things that I'm a big supporter of is looking at recruitment processes differently. So over decades, we would put resumes and recommended and then cover letters aside when they contain spelling mistakes, right? Because if you can't write a proper letter, why would you apply for this job? Now, those people may have very different talents than writing that letter, and I think that's something where technology can help us as well. So if you can train language models to figure out who has the best written letter. You can also train them to look through that and accept spelling mistakes as part of it, and do not kind of dismiss those candidates, but actually look at their resume without the prejudice that we as humans have, that you have to have correct spelling. So I think those are things that we can use AI for as well, in a different way, to actually dismiss those differences.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the big challenges is for a lot of us, we just don't understand what is being asked of us. And therefore, it is really difficult to communicate the skills, the abilities, what we do best, when often organizations offer far too little in insight, or the other side of that is far too much. And that becomes complicated in itself. I did some work within an organization where we took the job description from 10. I was head of recruitment at the time for this organization. It wasn't as an external provider. I recognized our job description was anywhere between 10 to 13 pages. And most of it was repeating itself in a variety of different ways. And I was like, well, if we just strip out all of the repeated elements and just say, well, we only need that said once, even if it's relevant in all 5 areas, it just needs to be said once, right? And all of a sudden, we got that down to literally about 4 pages without changing any meaning or anything else at all. And I sometimes think it's that simple. And with technology, with AI now, you could do that without me actually having to go through the 12 pages and figure out where the similarities are. Like AI, you could just say, do a thematic review of this document, pull out the key themes, and any duplication, please take out, and just leave us with the core elements. Then go in and do the human touch to make sure it is accurate. I mean, that is exciting, right? For somebody like me and others who face so many barriers, the insights that you can share across organizations, because they're not talking to each other, because they're too busy down their little runway and their channel, and they're missing out on all these opportunities. That is what really gets me excited. And I think we need to do more in the neurodiversity space around this as well. I think we're too many silos locally and globally in the neuroinclusion space as well. So maybe organizations, through certification, through support, through guidance, but also thinking about the supply chain, right? So there's another piece there, David, for you around getting organizations. I was in a double materiality assessment as part of what's going on in the EU directive in terms of trying to ensure that we have a world to live in, and this double materiality assessment, I think, is something that many organizations should be really deeply focusing on from an inclusion perspective, and around what their supply base looks like and how they're supporting their supply base, understanding some of the complexities, but some of the opportunities that exist within them and within some of those communities they work within as an organization. And I think bringing some of those suppliers communities together, we can absolutely make change. We saw this in COVID, right? We saw it in COVID, where the barriers came down, pharmaceutical companies worked together, and we solved complex problems really rapidly. Why cannot we do this when we consider neuroinclusion and D&I more broadly? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example of how the collective thinking and collaboration can help us make bigger steps, and I think that's certainly possible within neurodiversity as well. I think it's also something you mentioned, the double materiality assessment. We're also undergoing that as a company, and obviously you have to look inside to, yeah, what do you do for your own people, but indeed. It's really important. Who do you work with, and are they actually living up to the same standards? And both in the environment, in your governance, and in the social domain. So very much recognize that. I also want to. I was thinking about your comment on the on going to a barber, getting your hair cut. Somebody's very close to me. At some point, said, "I'm not going to go anymore. I'm not going to go anymore." So that's why developed myself a special skill. I actually do his hair every 2-3 weeks. By now, it's a crew cut, so it's a military style. But exactly the experience you described, like the noises, the chit chat. He hates it. It's like it's not going to happen. So I actually do his hair every 3 weeks because he then can avoid subjecting himself to that ordeal that he just didn't want to do anymore. So
Yeah.
very recognizable. I do actually joke when we do. It's like, how's it going at school? Are you any vacation coming up? Like the regular chats that you have at your hairdresser, we do replicate those.
Brilliant. Just to add a bit of torture into the situation.
Yeah,
No, but it's control, and it being able to. One of the big things is being able to control what's ahead of you, and I think we underestimate the ability to have some sense of control around what's ahead of us. And I don't think anybody likes. I can deal with being thrust into a situation. I can deal with that really well. With change, transformation, I go through a change curve really rapidly. However, like there is a limitation to how much any of us can go through that. And the more information, the more context, the more guidance around what's going to happen, who you're going to meet. Well, I know this barber. He's a family member, therefore I know him even
yeah,
better. I can say to them, because we built this trust, that I can say, stop. Actually, I just need a minute. I just need to go to the toilet. I need to go get a drink. I need to, that it's the same nuances that we need to build into the work environment that
yeah.
can be really difficult if there's not that psychological safety, that trust. And it doesn't mean that you need to tell that person everything about yourself. You just need to know that there's going to be enough trust there that in a moment where you just go, stop, what you're saying is really important. I just need to take a moment. I just need to go and get,
Yeah.
and I don't need to have to explain myself why I need to do that. But I do just need to, because if I don't, there's a trigger going to go, and you may not see it, but stuff starts to take over. Uh, and, and in that micro experience of having a haircut, we can understand it. I don't know why we can't understand it in all other facets and aspects of human life and existence.
Well, I think like we're starting to. So if you, for instance, look at ordering an Uber, so I think it's mostly when you order an Uber, whatever the level up, it differs per country. I always forget. But if you order one level up from the regular, you get the choice. So what is the temperature like? Do you want to have a conversation? Is it okay if there's music on? You can make these choices. And I think if we translate that into the workplace, those just the customization, taking personal preferences into account. It's super simple if you think about it like that.
Oh, wow. And even flipping that, the driver being able to say, I'm not that talkative. I like
Yeah,
to have my screen up. I like to listen to music, but if you don't want to listen to me, so actually we're combining the two. The the
yeah,
the customer can be mindful of the person, because I'll talk with a driver if they really want to. Equally, I will sit quietly, but it's understanding before you go into that situation around some of the nuances that actually,
absolutely.
if I'm
Yeah,
really tired, some days I don't want to talk, but other days I might feel a bit more energized and I'm happy to talk. So you're right, that personalization that is adaptable, dependent on how we feel in that moment. Whoa. And that is, I think, what technology and AI can provide us.
oh,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, and I think also one of the things that I know you're a father as well. So remember when your baby started to crawl. I remember going on all fours on the floor and literally looking for danger. So once they go out of the crib and they start roaming around in your room, looking for danger. So you see your electrical sockets, you see electric wires, you see, oh, that's actually a sharp edge. You only see that when you actually go to the same level. So I think this is something that also we can encourage HR to do, is look at the world from a neurodivergent perspective. So what happens in that open office plan? So, and amplify things. So basically just increase all the noises and see what it does to you, because there's a level of tolerance that may be different per person, but experiencing it is a different way of seeing the world, and creates better understanding of how everyone experiences the workplace and appreciates the workplace.
So I love that. And the thing about the dad, looking around like you or me, going around looking for the dangers. But if we think around somebody who's dyspraxic, who may immediately have more challenges with spatial awareness, and therefore will be much more likely maybe to bump in to things that are not placed very intuitively, cleverly. And therefore, getting somebody who's dyspraxic to walk around a space, it's not somebody who's dyspraxic cannot work in that space, but they could absolutely improve that space. So it's much less dangerous for everybody else. And, the person who invented texting was deaf, and they were creating texting to have calls amongst two people who were deaf. So we know that designing in the extreme in these instances ends up benefiting everybody, because who doesn't text now, who doesn't utilize social media in that context? And so I think we could do much more to positively enable people to test that environment and make it like a regular thing of like, let's have, Friday, there's an hour where we're just going to walk around and bump into stuff, or we're just going to purposely break stuff. Design teams, testers, organizations. I worked in a HR tech company. Every week on a Friday, we would do it. It didn't matter who you were. We would all have a go at testing the technology, and we'd all have different level of capability, but a customer has different levels of capability. So it makes sense that we do that. We do it consistently, and we naturally find ways to bump into stuff. I think that is the future of work, right? Lots of us walking around bumping into stuff and being really pleased that we do it, because we can make adaptations on that basis.
Absolutely. We learn from those running into things.
And we do it together, right? We do it as a supportive environment, so that it doesn't become this thing of, you've got a problem with lights, you tell us what the problem is, but we're incorporating everybody to see how we did this light change in a little cubicle. And it was just asking anybody who wanted to go up and experience what that light was like. And almost everybody said it was an improvement. However, those who were really impacted by the blue lights thought it was life-changing, in the sense that they refused to go in the box before because they found it too difficult. Now they were able to use the box. 5% can use it who couldn't before, but actually 95% thought it was an improvement anyway, and it was a nice environment to be in. Boom. I mean, we can solve the world simply, eh, David?
Yeah.
So as we bring this to a close, real pleasure getting you on. Thoroughly enjoyed it. If individuals, organizations, they're interested in the work that you do, they're interested in some of the work in the neuroinclusion space that you're doing, or they just want to follow some of the content and insights that you share more broadly, what would you tell them?
Yeah, definitely go to our website, www.topemployers.com, where you can find reports, insights, free downloadable to begin with. Following our channels on LinkedIn is an important one as well, because that's our main channel distribution for the insights that we have. And do ping me and get in touch, because we have this new program coming up, the Neurodiversity Impact Hub, that is going to go live in the beginning of next year. So if there are companies interested in assessing where they are on that maturity scale, that's a great place to begin the journey and to collaborate. And also just, a personal conversation go a long way as well. For those who prefer that, just send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm there.
Amazing. Listen, real pleasure. Thank you for sharing those details. I urge people to go and find out some more, learn more. I think there's a lot of insights that you may not be able to access that can be shared via that network. So again, it's been a pleasure. Hope you've
Thank you.
enjoyed the show. Make sure you go and catch some of our other episodes and reach out if you've got your own story to share and you'd like to come on the podcast. David, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
hopefully see you soon.
Absolutely.